I found out my husband has been secretly leaving every Friday night for 7 months to meet a woman across town. What I found in his car last week made me collapse on the driveway. My husband's name is Daniel. We've been married for 8 years, together for 11. We met in college, University of Michigan, junior year, at a study group for an economics class that neither of us particularly cared about. He was sitting across the table from me with a coffee that was clearly from the vending machine and a highlighter he kept clicking compulsively, and I remember thinking, that guy is nervous about something. I found out later he'd had a crush on me for a semester and had specifically joined that study group because he knew I'd be there. I've told that story at every dinner party for 11 years. I love that story. Daniel I don't know what tense to use anymore, a structural engineer. He works for a mid-size firm outside Ann Arbor. He is the kind of person who fixes things without being asked, who remembers that your mom's surgery is on a Thursday and texts you that morning without prompting, who keeps a running grocery list on his phone, organized by store section. He is thorough and steady and quiet in a way that people sometimes mistake for boring, but that I always understood as safe. I felt safe with Daniel for a decade. I want you to remember that when I tell you the rest of this. How it started. The first Friday. We had a tradition. Every Friday night, without fail, for almost 5 years, we'd cook dinner together, open a bottle of wine, and watch a movie. Not streaming browse for 40 minutes and give up. An actual movie, chosen in advance, sometimes with a theme. October was always horror. December was always something with snow in it. It was our thing. Small and domestic and completely ours. About 7 months ago, Daniel came home on a Friday, changed out of his work clothes faster than usual, and said, almost casually, almost like it was nothing, "Hey, I have to go take care of something tonight. I'll be back by 10. I said, "What thing?" He said, "Just a work thing. I'll explain later." He didn't explain later. I didn't push. It was once. People have things come up. I ate leftover pasta, watched half of a movie alone, fell asleep on the couch, woke up when I heard him come in at 10:12 p.m. He kissed my forehead. He smelled like cold air and nothing else. I went back to sleep. Second time it happened, 2 weeks later, same pattern. Quick change, I have to go handle something. Home before 10, kiss on the forehead. Third time, I asked again. He said it was a situation with a colleague that he couldn't really explain yet. Complicated. I promise I'll tell you everything soon. Just not tonight. I said okay. I kept saying okay. By the 5th time, about 2 months in, I stopped saying okay out loud and started saying it through gritted teeth while something cold and formless settled into my chest. What I started noticing. I want to be clear. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I'm not someone who checks her husband's phone or reads into things or manufactures drama. I've always been the person in the friend group who says, "I'm sure it's nothing," when someone's panicking about their partner's behavior. But there is a specific kind of feeling you get. I think anyone who's been through this knows it, where your body understands something before your brain agrees to. Where you're doing totally normal things, loading the dishwasher or driving to Target, and there's this low-level hum underneath everything, a frequency you can't turn off. I started noticing things. He always showered when he got home on those Fridays. Not unusual on its own, he showers at night sometimes. But he always did it on those nights, immediately, before we talked, before he sat down, before anything. He changed his phone passcode. I only realized when I grabbed his phone to check his alarm one morning, and my thumbs did the old code automatically, and it didn't work. He started keeping his car cleaner. Daniel has never, in 11 years, been someone who keeps a clean car. His back seat was always a low-level disaster of coffee cups and work binders and those little protein bar wrappers. Suddenly, it was spotless. Every Friday night when he came home, the car was spotless. Small things, each one explainable alone. Together, they made a shape I didn't want to look at directly.
I told my best friend. Her name is Carrie. We've been friends since 7th grade. She's the person I call when I don't know what I'm feeling. She helps me locate it. I called her on a Sunday afternoon in November while Daniel was out getting groceries. And I told her everything. The Fridays, the shower, the passcode, the clean car. She was quiet for longer than I expected. Carrie is not usually a quiet person. Then she said, "Marina, have you looked him in the eye and just asked him directly? Not hinted, not asked sideways, just said the words?" I said I hadn't. She said, "Why not?" And I said the thing I hadn't admitted even to myself yet. Because I'm scared of what happens after I do. She understood that. She didn't push me. She just said, "You'll know when you're ready. And when you are, ask him straight. He loves you. Whatever this is, he loves you." I held on to that. I held on to it tighter than I probably should have. The night I followed him. February, a Friday. He did the thing again. Quick change. I have to handle something. Keys off the hook. Something in me broke open. I waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner. I counted to 60. Then I got in my car. I followed him to a neighborhood I didn't know well. Older houses, tree-lined streets. The kind of area that used to be working class and is now halfway through gentrification. He parked in front of a grey colonial with a lit porch light, got out, walked to the front door like he'd done it 100 times before, because he probably had. A woman answered the door. I was parked half a block away, and I couldn't see her face clearly. I could see that she was around our age, maybe a few years older. She opened the door and he stepped inside, and the door closed behind him, and the porch light stayed on, burning. Like a little yellow fact I couldn't argue with. I sat in my car for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He came out looking the way you look after something hard. Not like a man who just spent the night somewhere thrilling, like a man who'd been through something. Head slightly down, hands in his jacket pockets. He sat in his car for a few minutes before he drove. Just sat there. I drove home first, beat him by about 5 minutes. Pretended to be asleep. He came in quietly, showered, slid into bed. Put his hand on my back in his sleep the way he always does. I lay there rigid until 4 a.m. 6 weeks of silence. I know. I should have confronted him immediately. I've asked myself 100 times why I didn't, and here's the most honest answer I can give. I had built a life with this man. We had a mortgage and a dog named Cleo, and dinner reservations for our anniversary in March, and a whole living future I could see clearly. And I knew that the second I said the words out loud, "I followed you, I saw you, I need to know," that future would become uncertain. It might survive, but it would be different. The version of us that existed before me knowing would be gone. So I held it. I functioned. I went to work. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I work with kids. I had to be present and regulated and calm. And then I came home and was a good wife to a man I was terrified of, and kept the secret of my own suspicion like a stone in my pocket that got heavier every week. I Googled things I'm embarrassed to have Googled. Emotional affair versus physical affair. Difference. How to know if your husband is cheating. Signs of a long-term affair. Do cheating husbands still act loving at home?
Signs your marriage is over. I want to be honest about the state I was in. I had already convicted him in my head. I had already started grieving, quietly, privately, the marriage I thought I had. I'd started doing the math, the house, the dog, the furniture, who gets the friends. I'd thought about calling my mom.
I'd written and deleted 3 separate texts to Daniel that all started with some version of, "I know. I was so certain. I was so wrong." What I found in his car. This is the part. This is why I'm writing this post. 3 weeks ago, a Saturday morning, early, Daniel was still asleep. I went out to my car and realized I'd left my water bottle in his car the day before when we'd run errands together. I grabbed his keys off the hook, went out to the driveway. His car was locked, but it unlocked with the fob. I opened the back door to get my water bottle, and I saw something on the floor behind the driver's seat. A folded piece of paper. A card, actually. The kind that comes with flowers. Cream-colored with a small printed border. I stood there in the cold driveway with the car door open for what felt like a long time. I picked it up. I opened it. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. It was a woman's handwriting, loopy, left-leaning, and it said, "Dan, I can never thank you enough for these past months. You kept showing up when you didn't have to. You saved my life. I mean that literally. Renee." I read it 3 times, 4 times. I sat down on the cold concrete driveway, back against the car, knees pulled up, and I stayed there until I heard the front door open behind me. Daniel came out in his sweatshirt and socks, and he saw me sitting on the driveway holding that card, and he went completely still. Then he sat down next to me on the concrete, right there on the cold driveway, in his socks, without a word. We sat side by side for probably 30 seconds. Then I said, "Who is Renee?" And Daniel pressed his hands to his face, and he took a breath, and he told me everything. The everything Renee is his co-worker's sister. Was his co-worker's sister? Nathan, a guy on his team, someone Daniel has worked with for 4 years and considers a real friend, not just a work acquaintance. Last August, Nathan came to Daniel in private, absolutely shattered. Renee, who was 38, divorced, living alone in that gray colonial on that tree-lined street, had tried to take her own life. She survived. She was in the hospital, then in treatment, then home. But she was home alone. Their parents were elderly and out of state. Nathan was terrified for her. He was splitting himself between his own family, he has a wife, 2 young kids, and trying to be there for Renee, and he was burning out. He asked Daniel if he would sometimes check on her, just sometimes, just to not let her be completely alone on the evenings when Nathan couldn't be there. He trusted Daniel. He said, "You're steady. She needs someone steady right now." Daniel said yes. That's what the Fridays were. He was going to sit with Renee. Sometimes they watched television. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes she was doing well, and they talked for hours. Sometimes she wasn't doing well at all, and those were the nights he came home looking like he'd been through something. Because he had. He was sitting with someone who was fighting very hard to stay alive. He didn't tell me because, and this is the part where I had to sit with something very uncomfortable about both of us. He was afraid of how I would take it. Not that I would assume an affair, necessarily, but that I would feel excluded, or secondary, or unsettled by his involvement with another woman's trauma. He and I had gone through a hard period a few years ago, a period of distance that we'd worked through but never fully named. And he was afraid that telling me he was spending private time with a woman in crisis would reopen something that had been delicate. He was protecting my feelings. He was doing it badly, obviously, catastrophically badly. But that was the intention. That's what the secret was. He wasn't meeting a lover. He wasn't living a second life. He was sitting on a couch in a gray colonial every other Friday night with a woman who was learning how to want to be alive again, because her brother asked him to, and because he is, fundamentally, a person who shows up. He was the steady thing someone needed. He's always been the steady thing. I need to be honest about the aftermath, because I think it would be dishonest to wrap this up with, and then I felt relief and everything was beautiful. The relief was real, enormous, immediate. The version of this story I had been living inside of, the affair, the secret life, the evidence of a man I didn't actually know, dissolved instantly. Gone. I could feel it leave my body. But something else moved in behind it. The first thing was guilt. I had spent nearly 7 months suspecting Daniel of betrayal. I had followed him. I had lain next to him every night, running through divorce logistics in my head. I had looked at him across the dinner table and thought, liar, cheat. He had been sitting with a suicidal woman every other Friday, coming home wrung out, and I had been constructing an indictment against him in my head. He didn't know any of it. That asymmetry, me holding this whole terrible story while he was simply living, simply keeping this quiet, difficult promise, was genuinely hard to absorb. The second thing was anger. Yes, at him, because he should have told me. I've said this clearly and he knows it. Whatever his fears about my reaction, keeping this a secret for 7 months was wrong. I wasn't wrong to notice. I wasn't wrong to feel something was off. Something was off. He took a piece of our marriage and managed it privately instead of trusting me with it. And that's a real thing we've had to look at. But also, and this took longer to admit, some of the anger was at myself. For the certainty, for how quickly I'd assembled the evidence into the worst possible story and then started living inside that story like it was fact. I never asked him directly. I never said, I saw you go into that house. I need to understand. I did everything except the one thing that would have ended it immediately. I asked Carrie why she thought I'd done that, and she said something that's been sitting with me since. Because some part of you wasn't totally surprised. Because the distance between you two in the last year scared you in a way you didn't have words for yet. And this gave it a shape. I think she's right. I think the fear of losing Daniel was already living in me before I ever followed him. I think the affair narrative was almost a release valve, a way to explain the fear by giving it a cause. That's the part I'm still working on. Renee. I asked to meet her. I want to be clear that this was my idea entirely. Daniel didn't suggest it, didn't push it, said he'd support whatever I decided. I just felt like I needed to close a loop in my own head. Replace the figure I'd watched from a parked car, faceless, threatening, with an actual person. We met for coffee 2 weeks ago, just the two of us. Daniel waited in the car outside because I asked him to. Renee is quiet and direct and has the specific energy of someone who has been through something enormous and is very slowly rebuilding. She shook my hand and said, I know this was probably confusing. I'm sorry for that. I said she had nothing to be sorry about. She said Daniel talked about me often on those Friday nights. That he'd show up and she'd ask how I was doing, and he'd talk about me the way... And she paused and looked for the right word and then said, the way people talk about places they love. Like a hometown. Like somewhere they can't wait to get back to. I cried in a coffee shop in front of a woman I'd spent months resenting. She was gracious about it. Where we are now.
Daniel and I are in couples counseling. Not because the marriage is in danger, I don't believe it is, but because we identified two real things that need actual work. 1. He needs to trust me with hard things instead of managing them quietly. His instinct to protect me from anything unsettling is something that comes from love, but functions like control, and we're looking at that honestly. 2. I need to look at the fear I'd been carrying before any of this started. The distance I'd felt. The way I never named it, but let it turn into suspicion instead. That's mine to carry and work on.
We still do Fridays. Different now. We went to a farmer's market last week, which is not our usual thing, which felt right. New tradition for a slightly new version of us. He still has his hand on my back when he sleeps. Renee is doing better. She started a new job last month. Nathan texted Daniel a photo of her laughing at his kid's birthday party. Daniel showed me, and we both just looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Why I'm posting this? Partly because I needed to release it somewhere, and a Reddit post at 1 a.m. felt less terrifying than calling someone. But mostly because, if you're reading this, and you're in that place I was in, that low hum place, that I know something is wrong but I haven't named it place, I want to say two things. Ask. Just ask. Have the conversation you're afraid of having. The story your brain writes in the absence of information is almost always more brutal than the truth. And the distance you feel in your marriage, the thing that made the fear feel so plausible to me, that's real and worth talking about on its own, totally separately from whatever you're afraid of. Don't let the fear of the dramatic thing stop you from addressing the quiet thing. The quiet thing is where it starts.